Today we're going to talk about Marvel Champions, specifically the Spider Tank deck. This is a defense-oriented leadership deck that can soak up a ton of damage. So let's get into it. Let's get into the build. First, take all of your Spider-Man hero cards. Next, you're going to have your basic resources. 1 copy of Energy, Genius, and Strength. 2 copies of the Power of Leadership. These are your 2 basic leadership resource cards. 1 copy of Mockingbird, 1 copy of Nick Fury, 1 copy of the Avengers Mansion and Helicarrier, 1 copy of Endurance, 2 copies of Invulnerability. Next, we're going to move into the core leadership cards over here. 3 copies of Make the Call, 2 copies of Lead from the Front, 3 copies of Morale Boost. Now you're going to have 1 copy of each of these unique allies: Maria Hill, Wonder Man, Vision, Hawkeye, and Squirrel Girl. What makes Spider-Man such a great tanky defensive character is the innate ability, so a 3 defense. In addition, you can gain an additional card when a villain initiates an attack against you, which is also fantastic. Note too, in a multiplayer game, Spider-Man can actually block and soak up damage for other heroes. So if you have another friend at the table that's about ready to be taken out by the villain, Spider-Man can jump in and take that hit. If you use Spider-Man's innate defense ability with Morale Boost, which is a 1-cost event, this is actually a leadership event, you can actually boost his defense up to a 4, so you can soak up even more damage. These 2 cards in conjunction are a great combo, and it's very cheap to play. Having 2 copies of Invulnerability in your deck can actually enhance Spider-Man's ability to survive and take a ridiculous amount of damage. As an example, maybe you're fighting the Wrecking Crew. Some of those villains hit pretty hard, so you want to be soaking up as much damage as possible. With Invulnerability, this allows you to place a tough status card on your hero. So when Spider-Man is not directly defending and you're using his defense attribute, if you use the toughness token, it can soak up all that damage. So if you get hit for 6, 7, 8 points of damage, that toughness card will actually soak up everything. So 2 copies of Invulnerability in your deck will go a very long way. Next up, I want to mention Backflip and Webbed Up. These are 2 cards that will help you soak up even more damage when you're playing Spider-Man. First, Backflip is an event that you can play to basically nullify all damage being done to you. So we already talked about Spider-Man's basic defense. We've already talked about Morale Boost. And now we have Backflip, which is a 0-cost event, which you can soak up even more damage. Next, we have Webbed Up. This is a great sort of control mechanism that you can throw on the villain. You can prevent that villain from attacking. Then when you take this card off, you throw a stun card actually onto that villain. So basically, this card, it costs 4, but it can soak up 2 attacks from the villain, which is a fantastic thing. To get the rest of this deck to function properly, we need to talk about resource management really quickly. Peter Parker, when he's in his alter ego form, can generate a science resource once per turn. And then secondarily, when Spider-Man is in hero mode, you can spend his web shooter counters to also add resources into the game. You're going to be using these 2 abilities to bring out all the different allies that you have in the deck. These allies are going to be very versatile. They can allow you to attack, thwart, and then also defend. So you can use them to defend when you're playing a multiplayer game and help other players at the table. So if they're about to take a really big hit, you can throw one of your wounded or injured allies into the mix to soak up that damage. There are a large number of allies present in this deck, being the leadership aspect. One thing that you're going to do once you have 2 or 3 of your allies out, you can use these Lead from the Front cards. For 2 resources, you can add +1 thwart and +1 attack to all of your characters. That includes your hero and all of your allies. You can actually have a pretty massive thwart or attack round. Or if you're just trying to whittle down the boss's defenses, you can use a combination. You have extra thwarting power and attacking power, so you can whittle down minions on a round. You can thwart, maybe get rid of some of those side schemes, things of that nature. With 2 copies of Lead from the Front in your deck, be aware that you want to use them when you have at least 2 or 3 targets on the board, if not 4. Another card that I really enjoy is Make the Call. You're going to have 3 copies of this in your deck. You're going to actually use this card to recycle and trigger a lot of those effects when your allies come into play. I'm going to show you a host of allies that are in this deck that give you bonuses when they come into play. So you constantly want to be recycling your allies using Make the Call. For a 0-cost event, this is a great card, and it really allows you to recycle those effects. On the screen are 3 cards that have triggered effects when they come into play. First one's Nick Fury. He has 3 different effects that you can use. Mockingbird stuns an enemy, and then one of my favorites is Squirrel Girl, who damages all enemies when she comes into play for 1 point of damage. If you think about it this way, use Make the Call to keep recycling these effects, and you have a pretty powerful set of options for you when you're playing this game. The bigger the game, especially with Squirrel Girl, you can really hit a lot of different enemies. You can take a lot of those drone tokens off the table if you're fighting Ultron, things of that nature. So think about these cards and recycle them. Another card with a triggered effect is Maria Hill. Allows all the players to draw a card. This is fantastic if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game, even a 2-player game. And then Hawkeye obviously deserves some mention. He has 4 arrow tokens that can be placed on him when he comes into play, and you can use those to whittle down enemy minions as they pop and come into play on the table. Use Hawkeye repeatedly, and use Make the Call to bring him back and just pummel the enemy with arrow tokens. It's a fantastic combo. Finally, let's mention when your allies do start to get a little bit weak. Let's say they only have 1 hit point remaining. This is a good opportunity to use them as a blocker for the villain itself. When the villains hit 4, 5, 6, 7 points of damage, that's not uncommon. For your weak allies that only have 1 hit point left, if you use them to defend and block, it soaks up all that damage. So that's a great way to keep your sort of weaker allies cycling into your discard pile. Then you can use Make the Call to bring them back. It's a very, very efficient way to avoid damage and to use their interplay abilities, so to speak. So especially with Maria Hill and Squirrel Girl, they only have 2 hit points apiece. You can cycle these through multiple times and soak up damage at the same time. It's a really fantastic combination. To sum it up, the Spider Tank deck is a nice blended deck with a large amount of versatility, especially if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game. Where you really want to play Spider Tank is in those missions where maybe some of the other players that you're with, they're very, very damage oriented, but they're kind of squishy. They take a lot of damage, and it's easy and very likely for them to get taken out. By using the Spider Tank deck, you can actually protect numerous other players at the table by use of these simple tips and tricks. I want to thank you today for joining me. I really enjoy putting different decks together for Marvel Champions, and hopefully you've learned something, or maybe it sparked some new ideas and deck building strategies that you want to try. As always, thanks for your time and have fun gaming.